Warning, the following video contains spoilers for the entirety of the William Hartnell era within the Doctor Who series, although you had 60 plus years to watch this yourself, so that's kind of on you. In case you've somehow been living under a rock for the past 6 decades, Doctor Who is not only one of the longest running TV programs ever created, but also a big staple for British culture, the BBC, and the science fiction genre altogether. In the briefest of explanations, it's about an alien being who simply calls himself the Doctor as he travels through time and space in his ship called the TARDIS, standing for time and relative dimension in space, battling all sorts of monsters across the galaxy, and maybe taking a little trip to ancient history every so often, living through past events. Originally, the show was going to be more educational for younger viewers, but have a dark enough edge for adults to enjoy, including death scenes and haunting imagery. However, since the Doctor's adversaries, the Daleks, were introduced as these bug-eyed aliens that initially the show's co-creator Sidney Newman didn't want to put in, the viewing figures absolutely skyrocketed. Now the show's mostly about how creative the writers can be with new creatures and the sort of scenarios they can put the characters in, while also still respecting the educational vision by experiencing history in some episodes. The program started back in 1963 before going on hiatus in 1996 after the Doctor Who movie, then returned for a revival series in 2005 up to 2022, which was also very successful, and now we essentially have another rebooted series that at the moment is quite desperately clinging on for dear life. Like many others of my generation, I began with the 2005 series starring Christopher Eccleston as the 9th Doctor ever since it first aired, and this could not have come at a better time for me personally. My family and I had moved from the US to England and a few months had passed at that point, where adjusting to a new life was very tricky at times, especially when it came to a new school and dealing with other classmates. I can tell you from personal experience that British and US schools aren't exactly the same, and with me being the only American amongst English kids, I was essentially a walking bullseye for them to poke and make fun of, with not too many wanting to be friends with me. The ironic thing is I'm actually only half American and half English. This was before I also knew that I had Asperger's, and a more common trait between that and autism is struggling to deal with change. So with that on top of the usual miserable British weather really bringing the mood down, I had a rather hard time getting myself comfortable into this strange new environment. But every Saturday evening, the Doctor and his companions would cheer me up with their newest adventures, while having some great chemistry with each other and the people around them. I would rewatch these episodes a lot growing up, and Doctor Who is the very definition of a comfort show for me, where I can relive all those warm and fuzzy feelings I had as a child. But would you believe me if I told you that up until recently, I had never actually seen the original classic series before? I watched Genesis of the Daleks from the Tom Baker era, Earthshock from the Peter Davison era, and Remembrance of the Daleks from the Sylvester McCoy era, but I never bothered trying any of the other serials before. From a surface level, it's not too difficult to see why. The classic series is quite different to the newer series with their cheaper props, sets, and effects, not a lot in the way of cinematography, occasionally stilted acting with even a bit of flubbing and ad-libbing, as well as much slower pacing with each storyline mostly ranging between 4 to 6 episodes, on the rare occasion going even further than that. Every episode of the classic series is roughly 22 to 24 minutes long, but with as many episodes as each serial has, that time does add up, leading to quite the commitment you would need to make if you want to try them out yourself. This is made slightly worse by the fact that the first and second Doctors have around 3 seasons with a whopping 40 plus episodes each. That's at least 40 straight weeks of Doctor Who back in the 60s with not a lot of breathing room before moving on to the next season. From the Jon Pertwee era onwards, they do reduce the amount of episodes per season to make it a little easier to stomach, but yeah, that initial hurdle can be very intimidating. It was for me anyway, and like I said, the production values aren't the best, so you may need to use your imagination somewhat to take it more seriously. I'm not going to go into some deep history about Doctor Who because that's not what this video is all about. I just want to share my thoughts and rank each episode of the classic series upon watching them for the first time without any nostalgic bias, starting of course with the era of the original Doctor played by William Hartnell. And yes, I'm also going to talk about the missing episodes that sadly didn't get preserved over time by the BBC. The ranks range from S tier, which I consider to be the best, to F tier, which I consider the worst. This is not usually the type of video I make for my channel, as it's mostly gaming related, but with Doctor Who meaning so much to me, I thought I'd make an exception here. I'm not celebrating anything or doing anything special, I just thought it'd be a very fun video to make, and if you like this and want to see me do the other Doctors in the future, let me know in the comments below and I'll be more than happy to do so. Shoutouts to Josh Snares as well as part of the inspiration for this video. His Doctor Who content is really good and you should totally check him out. I also want to make it very clear that this ranking is only my opinion and you don't have to agree with me on it. You may enjoy some episodes more than I do, and that's perfectly fine, as long as we're civil about it, alright? With all said and done, let's finally kick things off with the very first serial Doctor Who's ever produced, An Unearthly Child, which I'm going to put in B tier. This was a bit of a tricky one to rank because right off the bat, the opening episode is very impressive with just how well it gives you all the information you need in only 20 plus minutes. You get to meet Susan Foreman, a student of the school she goes to and seems more intelligent than her classmates, but also introduces some wild ideas and concepts that haven't been invented yet. This greatly concerns her teachers, Ian Chesterton and Barbara Wright, as to what Susan does after school, so they follow her to investigate. I'm gonna try and not question the legality of all this, so let's choose to accept it for now. Turns out Susan lives at an old junkyard where Ian and Barbara go inside and check it out. Trespassing as well. Okay, this is not looking good for them at all. They meet an elderly man who also lives there and ask him where Susan is, but he won't tell them because they force their way in, which, you know, fair enough. I probably wouldn't if someone broke into my home to find a person who willingly stays with me. Ian and Barbara then suggest that they go to the police about the old man because they think he's kidnapped Susan. On what basis? Right, I swear this episode's good, but Ian and Barbara are so quick to judge here that it does taint things a little bit. Eventually, the two of them charge into the police box they believe she's being kept in, and see that the inside is bigger than it is on the outside. They establish that this machine is the TARDIS, how it travels across time and space. The old man is Susan's grandfather, simply called the Doctor, and she herself is from a whole other planet and another point in time like him, wanting to settle into 60s England. The Doctor locks Ian and Barbara in to stop them from blabbing and transports the TARDIS to prove to them that this all really works, which could be seen as kidnapping, but we'll keep a tally between him, Ian, and Barbara on who's done more crimes than the other. So far it's 2 against 1 for Ian and Barbara. The episode ends with a shadowy figure approaching and then the credits roll to make you wonder what's coming. It has its problems, but this is overall a brilliant startup to the show and, as I mentioned, gives all the necessary information you need, leaving room for more during later episodes. I watched both the unaired pilot and the pilot that we eventually got, and yeah, I do prefer the latter overall. Mainly because, aside from the editing in the former not exactly being finished, the Doctor himself is perhaps a bit too aggressive in it as well. He even calls Susan a stupid child for leading the teachers to the junkyard even though she had no clue they were there. Though thankfully the final version does tone down the Doctor's anger and frustration a bit. The other 3 parts, on the other hand, don't really live up to the hype of the first one in my opinion, and I'm definitely not alone in saying that. We see that the mysterious figure is actually a caveman, and the Doctor has sent everyone back to the Stone Age. Now the plot is that the TARDIS crew get captured and can't leave until Za, the leader of the tribe, is taught how to make fire, otherwise this other caveman Kal will become leader, bearing in mind that this is a man who's capable of killing one of his own to make Za look incompetent. You'd think this wouldn't take 3 episodes to sort out, but it unfortunately does, and the serial really feels like a drag sometimes. One of the main issues I have with these parts is that the locations are either so limited or so similar looking that there's not enough variety to justify its length. There's also a lot of talking and not a lot of doing here, which does get rather boring, though I am glad it's only 4 episodes and not 6, thank God for that. An Unearthly Child is important to watch before anything else in this era, but please don't let it influence the rest of the show if you haven't seen it before, because right after that is the next serial, The Daleks, which I'm going to put in A tier. So for some reason as of right now, BBC iPlayer shows these episodes off first and completely disregards An Unearthly Child, meaning if you want to see the prior episodes to The Daleks and understand what the hell's even going on, you'll either need to find Unearthly Child on DVD or get it through totally legal methods across Time and Pirate Bay. The same unfortunately goes for the missing episodes as well, which again BBC doesn't bother putting on iPlayer to help newcomers fill in the blanks between the episodes that have survived. It's pretty annoying, but not impossible to catch yourself up, and some fans have done their best to reconstruct these episodes as best as they can, be it with animation or limited movement using still images. Anyway, on to the Daleks, which is perhaps one of the most iconic stories in all of Doctor Who, classic series or otherwise, introducing what will become the most dangerous yet simultaneously talented chefs and plumbers in the galaxy, well, the Daleks. Instantly, this is a far more interesting story than dealing with a tribe of cavemen, introducing more sci-fi elements to Doctor Who and not just education. Of course, the strongest parts involve the Daleks themselves, who are about as important to Doctor Who as the air the characters breathe, and obviously the most recognizable villains in the entire show, thanks to their tank-like designs, swerving heads with long thin eye stalks, skirts covered in Christmas ornaments, and their unusual artillery. This is all accompanied with their deadpan behavior, loud and gravelly robotic speech, and having no remorse for anyone that isn't a Dalek, killing them in the process. Later incarnations of the Daleks would fire lasers with their guns, but for early Doctor Who, you just die a horrible, negative death instead. And they wouldn't add lasers until the Tom Baker era, outside of the special edition of Day of the Daleks during the Pertwee era. It's also weird seeing the Daleks use a different form of attack by temporarily paralyzing Ian's legs after first meeting them, and in the final episode, one of their rival race, the Thals, even survives a fatal blast and doesn't even die, but falls unconscious. We never see this happen again in future episodes, at least to my knowledge. The Daleks just straight up kill people from here onwards, but it is interesting. They actually don't shout their trademark "exterminate" line in their debut either, which kinda makes me wonder where the kids from An Adventure in Space and Time heard it, but anyway. The most we get here is them saying the characters will be exterminated. It won't be until the next couple of serials with the Daleks where we hear the proper exterminate. We have a whopping 7 whole parts of story here, and the first serial written by Terry Nation, influencing the Daleks on the Nazis. 7 million viewers tuned in and were utterly creeped out by the Daleks, with children mimicking them in the playgrounds and gathering a much bigger audience for the show. This is a standout story for a number of reasons, and it's no doubt one of the best in the Hartnell era. But I honestly can't say it's one of the best Dalek serials out there, and I imagine the amount of hype it gets may be part of the problem. I think this story works quite well for the first 3 or 4 episodes, but by the time we get to the last few, it does start to slow right down, especially when Ian, Barbara, and the Thals cross this big jump in the caves that goes on far longer than it really needed to. There are some good moments otherwise. Susan's cheeky wink to the others is adorable, as is the moment where she laughs at the Daleks for saying her name weirdly. There's Ian trying to teach the Thals to fight for something instead of being pacifists through and through, and undeniably the first time you see the Daleks is a pretty big highlight. I definitely enjoy several parts of the original Dalek storyline, but to call it my absolute favorite would be a lie. As a bonus, I'm also going to put the Daleks in Colour on this list and place it in B tier. For those that didn't know this was a thing, to celebrate Doctor Who's 60th anniversary, in addition to bringing back David Tennant and Catherine Tate for a few specials as the Doctor and Donna, BBC also released the first story with the Daleks in full colour. It does what it says on the tin by colorizing the serial, but the catch is that they've also condensed the 7 episodes to a 75-minute movie. Not only that, but they also did it George Lucas and put some extra Foley, music, and special effects on top of the episodes. As you might expect, some classic purists really didn't like it when it came out, and opinions vary on this project as a whole. You'll either think it's a great disservice to the original episodes and completely unnecessary, or you might see it as a good way to get newcomers more interested in classic Doctor Who, and personally, I'm more in the camp of the latter. The colorization is absolutely beautiful to see, with only maybe the purple walls and the Dalek base being a little too saturated at times. Yes, there are complaints about Barbara wearing a pink shirt, though frankly I really couldn't care less about what color her clothes are. But I always love seeing old film and TV this way just to get a better idea as to how they may have looked as they were being filmed back in the day. I consider it a nice little glimpse as to what could have been. The editing is also brilliantly paced for the first half. Everything's clearly laid out and it definitely feels much faster and smoother than the original episodes personally. The second half on the other hand does make things go a little too quick, with a lot of details not very well explained and it gets hard to follow what's even going on. An example of this is Ian suddenly having the Dalek security camera in their room already ripped off the wall without us seeing it, and then using that camera to keep the cell door open. Another example includes the part after everyone's escaped their cell and need to get past the Daleks, but now it's done as a montage sequence instead of showing us step by step how it was all done. And then there's the problem of the frequent flashbacks to moments that happened just minutes ago, which is very annoying and may come across as insulting to the viewer's intelligence as if they couldn't remember that far back. But I get why they had to do this. 60s Doctor Who barely gives a scene more than a few cuts, if they're lucky enough to even have that many. Sometimes scenes are done in one shot, leaving not many options in terms of trying to trim down the episodes without a ton of continuity errors. They did need something to cut to, which as a YouTuber who edits their own videos and has made short films in the past, I can tell you personally that dealing with restrictions like that is a pain in the goddamn ass at times. Would I want to keep seeing the flashbacks more often? No, but am I going to keep complaining about it? A little bit yes, and a little bit no. Aside from that, the music can be needlessly bombastic as well, which on a few occasions may work, but it happens so often that it feels too modernized for what's supposed to be a slower Doctor Who story from the 60s. Like, it doesn't allow the audience to soak in the atmosphere when all you're focusing on is the bwah, 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 bwah. This, in addition to the Foley, is also in my opinion too clean to fit with the time period. Again, sometimes it's not too bad, such as the Daleks firing their guns, but when you get stuff like Susan going into the TARDIS and there's this really crisp sound effect of the door swinging open, it can be a bit distracting. The movie ends with a little teaser foreshadowing future colorizations and trimming of other Hartnell stories, which I would definitely be on board with. I like the idea of making classic Doctor Who more accessible to newcomers so that they're not entirely out of the loop whenever newer episodes reference them. them, and in general just giving them a chance to enjoy these storylines without having to feel like you need to sit down and watch so many serials, with some of them going on for a rather long time. Whether or not the BBC will actually go through with these other projects, we'll just have to wait and see, but I'm very much open to them. Following that, now that we're finally away from the Daleks for a bit, we have the Edge of Destruction, which I'm gonna put in B tier as well. You can definitely tell that they must have blown a huge chunk of their budget on the Daleks, because this is pretty much the show's first bottle episode, taking place entirely inside the TARDIS. I think this was a good move on their end, as we hadn't really been in the TARDIS for that long during prior episodes, and I'm surprised that future Doctor Who stories don't do this more often. Basically, something in the air causes everyone to go a little loopy and distrust one another, to the point of Susan holding a knife and repeatedly stabbing a chair in anger, and the Doctor threatening to throw Ian and Barbara out of the TARDIS mid-flight. It's a very unique storyline for Doctor Who even today, and at a generous 2 episodes to boot. While bottle episodes are usually quite cheaply made and don't have a lot in terms of visual flair, most of the time they make up for it by exploring the characters' personalities and relationships a little further than what we've seen thus far, and this is one of those instances. By the time it's over, the TARDIS crew do seem to be closer than they were before, especially with the Doctor and Barbara. This is a story that I think even non-classic fans could potentially enjoy, especially with the fact that it's only 2 20+ minute episodes, which is very easily digestible. The only thing I'm not crazy about is the ending where you discover the cause of the problem, but that's about it really. After that, we get our first missing episode with Marco Polo that I'm again gonna put in B tier. I'll be real with you folks, I'm not massively into the historical episodes of Doctor Who, whether it be classic or modern Who. I don't mind it so much when aliens and creatures are put in the middle of them. The Girl in the Fireplace, for example, from the David Tennant era, is in my opinion one of the best Doctor Who stories ever made. But when it's the characters simply experiencing history, I don't find that nearly as engaging. I'd rather be seeing all these creative sets and new designs for baddies that the Doctor has to face and how they're going to get around them. I guess what I'm trying to say is when Doctor Who goes more sci-fi, that's what I prefer watching, but when it tries to be educational, I'm not as enthusiastic. Marco Polo is probably one of the few exceptions here. I actually quite like this one, despite only the audio and caption still images making it out alive. Because of how dialogue heavy this serial is, it surprisingly works really well as kind of an audio drama. Yeah, it is another 7-part story, which does ask a lot from the audience, considering that we already just went through a 7-part serial with the Daleks, but put this on while you're cooking or going to the gym or something, and honestly this flies by faster than you may think. Now that's not me saying I'd never want to see the visuals recovered, far from it. I just wanted to point out how impressive it is that this story is still able to be enjoyed without them. The highlights for me were Susan befriending Ping Cho. It's not often we get to see her interacting with someone her possible age, and I quite like the villain Tagana played by Darren Nesbitt, who did the role very well, I thought. He managed to be intimidating without going too over the top. My only main issue with Marco Polo was that this was unfortunately the point for me where Susan's character started to feel like wasted potential in the show. She's the Doctor's granddaughter and almost as familiar with time and space as him, which should create some great scenes between the pair of them, and occasionally there are, but a lot of the time the writers don't seem to know what to do with Susan. One moment she's teaching Barbara and Ian about time and dimensions in space, while a couple of serials after this she calls Aztec hieroglyphics cartoons. Is she meant to be a genius or not? I'm slightly confused. Susan is mostly simplified as some screaming damsel in distress that gets frightened whenever she travels with her grandfather. Sometimes she seems like she's enjoying her adventures and gets a little adrenaline pumping, but with how often she weeps for her life, it does make you wonder why she even bothers sticking around half the time. Even her actress Carol Ann Ford caught onto this, saying the experience felt repetitive after a while, and is partially the reason as to why she left the show by season 2. It was no more obvious to me that she was getting a bit fed up than when she had to pull off the loudest scream she's ever done whilst looking for Barbara, which I'll spare you the agony. This must have been doubly frustrating when by the time we get to the Sensorites, Susan is able to use telepathy, which could have led to lots of different possibilities if she was allowed to use it more. I do still like Susan overall and particularly enjoy seeing her have a bit of fun now and then, whilst also getting to know more about her teachers to the point of calling them by their first name, but I do wish they utilized her vast knowledge more often during her time on screen. Anyway, next up is the Keys of Marinus, which I'm gonna put in C tier. I like the idea of this one, where the TARDIS crew have to go deal with a set of challenges to collect various keys. I'm a sucker for these sort of video game fetch quest types of stories because, well, I'm a big gamer myself, and the first half of this I would say is quite decent. I especially enjoy the parts involving the characters being brainwashed into thinking they're in some sort of paradise where everything's perfect and your needs are tended to, but in reality it's some sort of run-down, vile-ass space where it's not what it seems to be and shouldn't be visited by anyone. So it's basically a trip to Blackpool. That was all handled pretty well, aside from the 2 static brains that go down with no fight whatsoever. By the second half, however, the story does start to run its course and goes on longer than it should. The scenes in the snowy mountains are fine, but nothing that amazing, and the parts with Ian on trial are just not very interesting to me. I also didn't see much point in having another episode after they got all the keys and now they have to stop the Vord, who are these villains that have technically been there since the start but don't really come into play until the very end. You probably could have cut them out and not missed anything. As a whole, Keys of Marinus isn't terrible, just not the best of this season or the Hartnell era in general. After that, we have the Aztecs, which I'm putting in A tier. A lot of people really love this particular serial, and I can kinda see why. It's the first time the show has somebody trying to alter history. In this case, Barbara pretends to be a goddess and wants to stop somebody sacrificing themselves for the sake of a little rain, with the Doctor trying to convince her not to because history shouldn't be rewritten. And this ultimately backfires on Barbara as the sacrifice simply happens in a different way, so now she has to keep up this ruse that she's a goddess and earn the people's trust. There's an interesting moral dilemma here as to whether or not Barbara was right to do what she did, and it's only more tense with the fact that she's just gradually blowing her cover and the fact that one of the tribe's already onto her. It's so interesting that my only issues are perhaps with the other stuff going on that stop me putting this in S tier. Ian gets made a general and teaches his new recruits how to fight, with one of them getting jealous and challenging him to a duel. Susan is about to be forced into an arranged marriage and she tries telling the Aztecs that it's an outdated tradition, and the Doctor accidentally puts himself into his own marriage. It's not that these side plots are bad per se, but they just don't feel as exciting as what Barbara goes through. The Doctor feeling awkward around his new wife may be a little humorous, but that's about it, I'd say. It is cool though that the villain this time doesn't even get killed off or receive his comeuppance in any way. Things just kinda go back to the way they originally were. It's very rare that you see that sort of thing in Doctor Who. The Aztecs is a very entertaining watch and certainly one of the best in the first season. Do I think it's overrated? Maybe slightly, but I do see a lot of the good in this serial and can understand why a lot of people think it's a masterpiece. Following that, we have the Sensorites, and I'm sad to say that this is gonna have to go in E tier for me. I found this one to be very boring. The first episode is pretty decent, and with a memorable cliffhanger of a Sensorite peeking through a window outside in space, but everything afterwards is incredibly dull. There's so little that happens here, and it absolutely did not need to be 6 parts long. Hell, I don't know if it's even worth 4. As the second alien species to have the focus in Doctor Who, the Sensorites aren't especially compelling in my opinion. They're sensitive to sound and the darkness, that's about it. Man, don't play the rock band called The Darkness, they'll lose their goddamn minds. There is one moment where Susan takes matters into her own hands briefly, despite the Doctor telling her not to, which doesn't go too well, but the conversation afterwards does create a deeper connection between the two of them, so I can't exactly say I left the serial with nothing. Outside of that in the first episode though, it's another storyline where there's one dickhead in the group that doesn't trust the TARDIS crew or their own colleagues, and it's just a matter of time before the main cast sabotage their operations and vice versa. It's a lot of been there, done that, and some people at least like the way the Sensorites look, but I don't see it personally. The suits appear quite cheap to me, and I don't think the masks are all that impressive. It's like they just glued on black buttons, put some cotton on, and called it a day. I believe these guys are basically meant to be the next door neighbors to the Ood from the modern series as well, which only makes this more depressing as the Ood have a much better design to them. But yeah, not a fan of the Sensorites, lowest point in the season I feel. And moving on from that, we come to the Season 1 finale with the Reign of Terror, which I'm gonna put in D tier. This one's not awful, but I don't find it very exciting either. It's one of those types of historical serials that I usually worry about whenever they come up, just straight up going through what happened during that time period, and as I explained in the Marco Polo segment, they rarely land with me personally. In this case, the TARDIS crew are just experiencing the French Revolution, and a problem I have is that there's so much time spent in this prison, which is fine for a little bit, but it does lose its impact after a while. I think the Doctor going into this prison and disguising himself as this regional officer is fairly entertaining, as well as Lemaitre completely sussing him out, but aside from that, it's not the most fast-paced story out there. As of right now, this may also be the first story you'll see with animated episodes if you're going in order, since a couple of the original episodes did get lost to time. Some fans find this animation style a bit jarring compared to other animated episodes, but I don't think it's all that bad, except for Susan. I'm not sure why she looks older there than she's supposed to be. I'll admit that the sets are quite nice in this serial. I actually do believe that they've been transported to 18th century France, and nobody's phoning in their performance at all. But to summarize, I would say that the Reign of Terror is simply fine. Nothing dreadful. I don't regret watching it. I just think there are better stories out there. And that right there concludes the very first season of Doctor Who. I would say for the most part that this was a decent enough beginning. There were some pretty good serials, a middling few, and only one that I would consider to be weak, which is a lot better than I initially thought it'd be. I was almost expecting it to be more rough around the edges than it actually was. I do find it a bit weird that the Doctor is not really the central character in this first outing. They sort of give Ian the main role by having him as the leader in some instances, and place him in pretty much every fight scene. Not that I'm expecting Hartnell to get into fisticuffs anytime soon, but it's strange that for a show called Doctor Who, the Doctor doesn't have as much importance as he would do after this season. These serials did at least keep enough of my interest to try out later seasons, and speaking of which, let's move on to season 2. Hopefully it's going to be bigger and better than the last one. First up, we have Planet of the Giants, and this may surprise some people, but I'm actually going to put it in A tier. I've seen a fair bit of negativity towards this serial because of how low budget the props and sets are, so much so that it almost feels like Doctor Who for first graders. The TARDIS crew have been shrunken down in size, and everything around them is giant. And yes, obviously the larger stuff doesn't look all that realistic, but I really admire the amount of effort they clearly put into these props and sets. Some of them must have taken an ass-numbingly long time to build. My favorite one's probably gotta be the giant sink that the Doctor and Susan run into, and they put so much detail into the drain in particular by adding scratches and limescale to it. It even allows William Hartnell and Carol Ann Ford to climb down the drain, which I wasn't expecting. I figured they were just going to paint the floor or whatever. It's really impressive. What does stop me from putting this serial in S tier though is perhaps the B story that coincides with everything else, where you have these people trying to find out more about this new insecticide that's far too deadly to give to customers, thus it was cancelled. Although for some reason there's this one guy who feels it warrants murdering another man over it so that he can take the insecticide for himself. It's really weird and not necessary at all, I feel. I think the idea of the Doctor and his friends being small and everyday objects now suddenly at risk of killing them is more than enough of a narrative to work with. We didn't need all this extra stuff. To an extent, I can understand why some people don't consider this to be a very good story, because the show is trying to do something that the money behind it just can't back up. But for me, I do appreciate the work that's been put into this. The production values are certainly better than another serial in this season, but we'll get to that in a bit. And with only 3 episodes to the whole thing, Planet of the Giants is another one that I think you can easily watch if you haven't seen classic Doctor Who before. Right after that is the big one, the Dalek invasion of Earth, and yeah, this isn't gonna shock anyone, but I'm making it my first S tier serial. This was fantastic. I really enjoyed Dalek invasion of Earth, and it's one of the few 6-parters that didn't even feel like 6 parts to me. They really went all out compared to the first Dalek serial, which was already quite impressively made for its time. We've now got them completely taken over Earth, even if we only see the Daleks roam around London, but we'll ignore that. There are way more locations than what we saw before, no more of the same jungles or Dalek space stations. We see the people of London arming themselves and taking the fight to the Daleks. The Daleks themselves are more cold and ruthless than ever. We get the first Supreme Dalek that's in charge of the others. Everyone has a role to play in defeating their enemies. And of course, I can't possibly forget to mention that this is the first time we have to say goodbye to a companion during the final episode, that being Susan. Everything before this point was already great, but this scene alone is worth watching the whole serial for. Both William Hartnell and Carol Ann Ford do an amazing job here. I wish the reasoning behind Susan's departure was better instead of running off to marry this guy she hardly met, but the emotions still run really high during this part. I love the Doctor having to contemplate for a moment as to whether or not Susan would be better off without him, while Ian and Barbara stay back to let him figure things out. And I adore the speech that he gives to Susan as well, keeping it short and sweet but memorable with every word. "One day he shall come back as David Bradley." This is also one of the extremely rare times that the Hartnell era plays any music whatsoever, which they very appropriately left after the TARDIS is already dematerialized, and Susan is trying to process everything that's happened and what she's going to do now, as she slowly walks out of frame for her final shot. Oh, that's so good! I can't believe this is still as effective now as it must have been in 1964. Could have at least let her get some shoes though first, Doctor, damn. I'm glad to see that Carol is due to return as Susan in the newer series, having already made a brief cameo in the Interstellar Song Contest of all episodes to put her in. With the show once again sorta dangling by a thread, hopefully we'll see her one more time before any cancellations happen, or even worse, she suddenly passes away. I mean, the poor old girl's in her mid-80s now, and the only member of the original TARDIS crew still alive. But at the very least, we'll always have this serial to go back to as Susan's final hurrah, and yes, I know that she does return in the 5 Doctors during the Peter Davison era, but that's more of a celebration of Doctor Who and its characters as opposed to Susan coming in for one last fight. Dalek Invasion of Earth is by far my favorite Hartnell storyline, and I'm sure that's not an uncommon opinion, but it really is the best for me, and I highly recommend you look at it. Following from that massive epic, we have another two-parter here, The Rescue, which I'm gonna put in B tier. It's a pretty basic story involving searching for survivors after a big ship crash, and this is where we get introduced to our new companion, Vicky, who I gotta say was definitely more fun to travel with than Susan. This is closer to what I wanted her to be, eager to travel with the Doctor and his friends, have this huge bond with each other, and just generally be charming and likable, which she certainly is. It's a shame she doesn't have the same knowledge of time and space that Susan does, but I'm nitpicking now. The twist at the end of this serial is quite cool as well, and it was a good way to further incentivize Vicky to become the new TARDIS member, now that she basically has nothing left going for her at this point. And not to mention that she's come at a really good time while the Doctor's just left his granddaughter behind. In fact, my favorite scene from The Rescue has to be when he accidentally requests something from Susan, but stops mid-sentence as he remembers where she is, and you have Barbara and Ian coming over to help him instead. That's a really sad but sweet moment from everyone, and I love it when Doctor Who tugs at the heartstrings. Shame on Barbara for killing Vicky's pet sand beast though, that poor thing was doing nothing. After that, we get the Romans, which I'm putting in C tier. Again, I think this one just comes down to me not overly liking the historical episodes, so I am somewhat biased here. It's a fine enough serial, and the Doctor having to pretend to be this musician for Emperor Nero is silly enough to be entertaining. Nero's obsession with Barbara does freak me the hell out, especially during the part where he's playfully chasing her as she's trying to get away. But yeah, that's pretty on point for him based on what we know of his actual mannerisms. I do like that the Doctor and Vicky go on an almost separate adventure to Barbara and Ian, but it centers around the same location. They spent nearly the entire time away from each other, which I don't remember if the modern series ever did something similar. I feel like they should try that sort of thing again one day. I also enjoyed seeing the Doctor's reaction when he finds out that he was the one that started the Great Fire of Rome, taking great pleasure in knowing he just became part of the history books without realizing. It's not often that we get to see this side of the Doctor, and it's very nice when it does happen, even if it's over something quite chaotic, like burning down all this Roman architecture. Hartnell's Doctor has a bit of a reputation for being very grumpy, and yes, that can be the case sometimes, but it doesn't last throughout the entire era, and it's serials like this that show you a whole new aspect of the First Doctor. Otherwise though, yeah, The Romans is an alright enough serial for me. Now we come to the Web Planet, and there's no questioning it, this is going straight into F tier. Where do I even begin with this one? I already knew that the Web Planet was already disliked by a lot of classic Who fans, but I really didn't expect it to be this bad. Okay, so firstly, these episodes all look horrible. Even by 1960s standards, the costumes and sets are absolutely atrocious. With the Zarbi suits, you can very clearly see the holes that very human-looking legs are coming out of. The Menoptera probably have the better costumes, but the wire work that's used whilst they're flying is laughably goofy. And the space background is so obviously a black curtain with stars painted on. You've got the Menoptera doing these silly voices and ridiculous hand motions. The caterpillar versions of them hop along the ground, and one of them's got this really hoarse speech that doesn't fit whatsoever, and the Zarbi constantly do this annoying as hell beeping that goes on for so long. Can't forget to mention how one of them accidentally bumps into the camera too. It all looks like a pantomime for Doctor Who instead of the real deal. For some reason, they also thought it was a good idea to rub Vaseline all over the lens, and now everything's seriously blurry. I can barely tell what's going on here, but maybe that's actually a good thing, because this is one of those serials that you really don't want anybody walking into. It's embarrassing to even sit down and watch this, especially when you're near the end with the Menoptera fighting back against the Zarbi and these actors just completely lose their marbles. If you're able to tell me what the flying hell's happening right now, do let me know. I'm not sure how much these people were paid back then, but whatever it wasn't enough. The worst crime the Web Planet commits, however, is that it's so boring. Despite how batshit crazy everything looks and feels, this story has absolutely no business being 6 parts long, and my god, it feels like it never ends. I got to the end of episode 4 and really did say to myself, Jesus, are we still going? Is there anything I like about the Web Planet? Well, the voice of Animus is pretty sophisticated, and the design of it's interesting too. Yeah, I got nothing else, this sucks. Unfortunately, I have a lot more negative things to say about this than I do positive. The Web Planet is easily one of the worst Doctor Who stories I've ever seen, right up there with Love and Monsters and Fear Her from the Tennant era, and I don't plan on watching this again for a very, very long time. After that travesty is the Crusade, which I'm putting in D tier. Only a slight step up from the Web Planet, and it's certainly a lot more competent than that serial, but I honestly barely remember anything from this one, other than Barbara having to pretend to be the king's sister, which doesn't last long at all, so why was that even a thing? Part of the problem with the Crusade might be because most of the episodes are missing, but I doubt having them recovered will change my mind that much. This was just a completely forgettable storyline for me, and I don't have anything useful to say about it, so next. Following that, we have the Space Museum, which I'm putting in B tier. This is a similar case to Unearthly Child for me, where the opening episode is fantastic, but the rest of it is just alright. I really love the idea that the first part provided of the TARDIS crew seeing these different objects across time and space held in a simple museum, including an empty Dalek shell and even themselves trapped in glass cases. This is something straight out of Twilight Zone, and it's such an ingenious concept for Doctor Who. It's one of the few times where I was genuinely excited to see what was going to happen next, and I couldn't click on the next episode button fast enough with an iPlayer. Sadly though, the other parts don't live up to the hype whatsoever in my opinion. It's another Rebels vs Dictators storyline, which kinda started with the Daleks, but they were adding more and more between serials such as the Web Planet and to a lesser extent the Sensorites. So by the time we get to the Space Museum, the formula's already worn out its welcome. I still find it enjoyable enough, but I did get left wanting more, and that's disappointing. I really liked the Doctor pretending to be a Dalek though, that was hilarious. If the first episode wasn't so good and held so much promise for something greater though, I probably would have put the Space Museum in C tier instead. Next up is The Chase, and this one's definitely going in E tier for me. We've got our third serial focusing on the Daleks, and it's undoubtedly the worst one yet for me. I didn't like The Chase at all. They made the Daleks absolute morons here, and I don't just mean they make stupid mistakes, which they do, but they've also been deliberately made dumb for the sake of adding more comedy. You know, the most fearsome beings in the galaxy? Yeah, let's just mock them again and again, taking away any sort of fear factor these beings once had. You have one Dalek who can't read properly and keeps going, There's one Dalek who somehow throws itself off a ship, and there's a Dalek who's basically a yes man and just stands there until it's told to leave. It's so painful watching this. I don't know if this style of comedy was any better during the 60s, but in today's world, it's extremely dated. Which sucks, because the idea of the Daleks chasing the TARDIS crew across different points in time and space is a cool idea. But no, we gotta make room for the poor man's version of the Empire State Building with this Alabamian dude in a scene that goes on for way too long. And we gotta add Dracula and Frankenstein's monster next, or sailors that mistake a Dalek for an angry god. This is like Doctor Who with Mad Libs when I say it out loud. The only two things in The Chase worth giving a damn about is, for one, this is where we finally do say goodbye to Barbara and Ian after they use the Dalek's time machine to get home, which is a nice enough send-off and less depressing than Susan's, even if the Doctor is once again a bit sad about it. Plus we get introduced to our latest companion, Stephen Taylor. I wasn't totally sad to see Barbara and Ian go compared to Susan. This may sound damning, but I feel like after approximately 80 episodes with them, I kinda had enough. I didn't hate them at all, they were fine characters, but I thought they were maybe a little too bland. Barbara less so because she did challenge the Doctor a few times and wasn't afraid to mess with time like in the Aztecs, but Ian didn't have a great deal of personality outside of being the action hero of the group. Still though, man, what a letdown of a serial for companions to leave. Anyway, The Chase is overall pretty crap and I don't like it. Moving on. To finish off season 2, we have the Time Meddler, which I'm putting in C tier. This one was okay. It's not good, it's not bad, just a very average serial. We have to do the thing where Stephen isn't convinced that all this time travel stuff is real, and the Doctor gets captured by the monk, who you don't find out until way later is actually another time traveler with his own TARDIS, which should be a lot more interesting, but for me, it's not. I don't find the monk to be all that engaging a villain. He wants to alter history just for the fun of it, which, yeah, is a bit evil, but it's not exactly diabolical. These days, you can probably look at him as the less successful predecessor to the Master, an actually evil bad guy who did various crimes, not just stick to one particular niche. It's nice to have the Doctor go up against a singular adversary for once instead of a whole group of them like he usually does in the Hartnell era, but this was not the story to do that, I feel. And bringing the monk back in the Daleks' master plan later didn't really do anything for me. As a whole, the Time Meddler's just fine. Can't say I hated it, but I didn't love it either. So that wraps up season 2, and while there's probably not as many good or interesting serials, and there were definitely a few more lows, the highs are incredibly high, and it's great to see that even early Doctor Who is able to incorporate a bit of emotional drama now and then. This is where the writers also allowed the Doctor to be the center of attention this time, and that was certainly the right call to make. He's the one that consistently drives the plot forward, so of course we should put all of our focus on him. I would overall say that this season is almost as good as the first, but for different reasons. Does it only get better from here with the third season? Let's find out. Don't worry, I've noticed how long this video is already. This is the last one and only a couple serials left afterwards before we're done. Kicking off Season 3 is Galaxy 4, which I'm placing in D tier. The first of the missing stories to get fully animated, and wow was this not a good first impression to me. It was nice seeing everything in color for a change, but unfortunately not only was the animation itself rather stiff, it also doesn't do a good job at recreating certain sets and takes a huge amount of liberties, especially inside the Rill ship. I don't think the story is bad at all. It's kind of your basic don't judge a book by its cover type of plot, where the Dravins are this beautiful but devious race, while the Rills are hideous looking monsters that are really the good guys. Other than the leader of the Dravins, Maga, yeah, that's really her name. Her subordinates are all identical to each other in the animated version, which I thought was part of the point with the theme of the serial. However, when looking at the still images and the only surviving episode, the women all appear different to each other. So now I'm wondering if this was some sort of creative decision on the animator's end, or was it simply down to laziness? I know I shouldn't expect a lot from an unofficial animator for the show, and it must feel great knowing that the BBC thought this was good enough to put on their official service, but this wasn't for me. Not to mention that Steven is barely used in this story, and I can't really figure out why he's even here. It's unclear right now as to whether or not I'd enjoy Galaxy 4 a lot more if the other episodes do manage to be recovered, but until that day comes, it's not one of my favorites out there. Next up is Mission to the Unknown, which I'm putting in C tier. This is an odd one to rank because it's only one episode, a missing one at that, though it did get animated as well, and a recreation was made by students of the University of Central Lancashire, basically acting as a little teaser to the Daleks' master plan later in the season, and by that I mean right after the following serial. So it feels weird hyping everyone up for this when 60s viewers only had to wait a few more weeks to see it. I don't think they really spend enough time establishing the characters before they both get killed off. Mission to the Unknown's unique in the sense that this is the first Dr. Light episode, not having him appear in the entire thing, but that's about all worth noting this serial for. It's otherwise an okay side story, just don't expect much from it. Before we get to the Daleks' master plan, we have the Myth Makers, which again I'm gonna put in C tier. It's another historical serial, and another missing one, this time taking place in Greece. They confuse the Doctor for Zeus, which is a bit that goes on for a while. Stephen gets captured, again not being given a great deal to do here, and Vicky is mistaken to be a prophet, with some tension rising from another prophet knowing that she's a fake. The Doctor coming up with the idea for the Trojan horse and being one of the people stored inside of it was somewhat amusing, but apart from that, this story is all around as okay as most of the other historical episodes. Vicky's exit is definitely more abrupt than what we've had thus far though, going away because she fell in love with one of the Greek soldiers and instantly decided to leave this life of traveling with the Doctor behind, further adding salt to the wound by having the two talk about this off screen. That's very lame, though not as bad as a later companion's exit. We do also meet Katerina, a Trojan servant that's going to play more of a role in the next serial, but otherwise, the Mythmakers is another alright storyline for me. Now we get to the Daleks' master plan, which I'm putting in A tier, and I can already hear people asking, why is this not an S tier? It's brilliant, how dare you not say it's amazing? Simply put, it needs to be fully recovered, and I'm frankly quite flabbergasted that an animation for it still hasn't been made yet outside of ongoing fan projects, given how popular this story is. It's a 12-part epic with only 3 surviving episodes and a few clips from other episodes. That's it. The rest is the usual pictures with captions on them, which if you're gonna tell a giant space opera, it's really hard to feel 100% invested doing it this way, at least for me. I really hope this does get recovered in some form or fashion because the Daleks' master plan is essentially the chase, but way better. The Daleks once again pursue the Doctor and his friends across different planets at different points in time, and they plan on building this weapon called a Time Destructor, which destroys anything by vastly accelerating time. That's such a badass sounding device. And the Daleks also team up with the Guardian of the Solar System, Mavic Chen, who's played by Kevin Stoney and does a pretty darn good job portraying an egotistical villain. Personally, I like him more as Tobias Vaughn in the Invasion from the Patrick Troughton era, but if I ever get to that, I'll go in further detail. This serial gets quite dark too. There's one part where a stowaway from a prison planet takes Katarina hostage, but she sacrifices them both by releasing the airlock into space and sucking themselves out, making Katarina arguably the first companion to die in Doctor Who, although I would say she didn't stick around long enough to be a companion. There's another scene where space agent Sarah Kingdom kills her own brother, believing that he turned traitor, and by the end of the serial, the Time Destructor activates and rapidly ages Sarah until she's nothing but a corpse, which is a horrible way to go. Seriously, the Daleks' master plan isn't afraid to be a bit bleak from time to time, but I'm all for it. That brother from earlier, by the way, Space Agent Brett Vion, he's played by Nicholas Courtney, who would go on to be Brigadier Lethbridge Stewart in the future, one of the big recurring characters in the classic series. Neat. Interestingly, this is also the first and only time the classic series celebrates Christmas when one of the episodes aired on Christmas 1965, not even acknowledging the holiday again until 40 years later with the Christmas Invasion, David Tennant's first full episode. The Daleks' master plan is a very big time sink, and with a lot of it currently being missing, I doubt everybody's going to invest in it a great deal, but I understand why plenty of people do really like it, and if this ever does get animated, you bet I'm watching that as soon as it releases. After that, we have the Massacre, or the Massacre of St. Bartholomew's Eve if you want the full title. I'm going to put this in B tier. Okay, so I've mentioned at least a couple of serials already where they have one episode that's really good, but the rest of them are inferior. With The Massacre, it's the opposite for me. The first 3 episodes, in my opinion, are not all that exciting. Again, partially because historical Doctor Who episodes are just not my thing, and it doesn't help that this is yet another missing serial. But the final episode is awesome. For 3/4 of the Massacre, I found it to be rather tedious. It was nice seeing Stephen interact with this girl Anne, who warns him of the upcoming religious massacre, and having William Hartnell play both the Doctor and the Abbot of Amboise was an intriguing little bait and switch. Like, was that the Doctor in disguise, or an entirely different person? But the rest of it is very meh to me. Although I didn't even realize until researching for this video that Gaston was played by Eric Thompson, the late father of Emma Thompson, and the narrator for the Magic Roundabout series. However, things get really good once you hit that last episode. It's hours before the massacre begins, and the Doctor insists that Anne goes to her aunt's house and stays hidden, with Stephen pleading to the Doctor that she won't be safe there. Then we get an extremely heated argument between the two of them about whether or not the Doctor has just sent this poor young girl to her death and is among the 10,000 people that got killed in the massacre. It royally pisses off Stephen. He is furious, and it gets so bad that he says no matter where the TARDIS lands next, he's getting off. The Doctor has truly crossed the line for the sake of not altering history, and has no idea of Anne's fate. After Stephen gives the most careless goodbye we've had yet, the Doctor at this point has no companions left, and he takes a moment to realize that he is now alone, with an empty feeling in his heart as a result of his actions, forced to travel by himself. Oh my god, this is so sad. Where did all this heavy drama come from, and why wasn't this part better preserved? I mean, the scene's great on its own with just the audio, but imagine how much better this would be with the visuals intact. It'd be one of the most depressing moments in Doctor Who history if only more people could see it in its original form. Of course, this moment of loneliness doesn't last too long, because now we have our new companion Dodo, who accidentally wanders into the TARDIS in need of a police box, and Stephen does return to warn the Doctor of a cop coming, so he sticks around for a bit longer. Does it reduce the tension from earlier? A little bit, but seriously, watch the last episode of this. It's some of the most emotional stuff the Hartnell era's gotten yet, in my opinion rivaling the Doctor leaving Susan, and it's where Stephen truly shines for me as a character, after not being terribly impressed with him at first. So after that slightly downer note, we now have the Ark as our next serial, which I'm again putting in B tier. I think the first half of this one is very engaging after Dodo brings the common cold to this civilization free of disease, and suddenly it's like the worst condition anyone in this world can get, with the TARDIS crew being held as prisoners because the people in the Ark think that they want to wipe everybody out. However, the second half suddenly becomes an entirely different story, with the Monoids changing from this race of servants to the new rulers of the Ark, and you guessed it, it's another rebels versus dictators story from here onwards, and I am so done with these now. If I maybe watched these kinds of stories months or years apart from each other, then perhaps I wouldn't mind so much, but in this current age of binging, it's getting a bit silly now as to how often they come back to the same concept over and over again, usually with some very good ideas beforehand. It's like the writers keep coming up with these fresh and original concepts and have these intricate plans as to how they begin, but then partway through they just crumple them up and are like, have the oppressors go against the oppressed again, who's gonna notice? So yeah, I really like the first half of the arc, but the other half is far too repetitive at this point. Next up is the Celestial Toymaker, which some of you are going to disagree with me on this, but I'm actually going to put it in A tier. People seem to be very split on this particular serial. You either think it's great, or you think it's cheap and tacky. I really like this, despite only the last episode surviving and the rest are missing, though it did somewhat recently get animated at last, most likely after the Toymaker himself came back as part of Doctor Who's 60th anniversary and was played by Neil Patrick Harris. In his debut, he's played by Michael Gough, aka Alfred from Batman 89 to Batman and Robin, and he is brilliant here. I love Michael Gough as the Toymaker. He's utterly devious yet so calm at the same time, like he's that confident in his abilities. The costume is likely a bit racist in today's society, but he's not pulling off an accent or anything like that, so I don't know, maybe it's really not that bad. I can understand the other side of people that aren't huge fans of this serial though. It's probably the most visually reliant of the entire bunch, especially as Steven and Dodo are playing the Toymaker's games, and with the first 3 episodes being entirely missing, well, you can see the issue. It also doesn't help that the Doctor almost completely vanishes from the whole story, both figuratively and literally. In the context of the narrative, the Toymaker does it to stop the Doctor from helping Steven and Dodo, but behind the scenes it's most likely due to William Hartnell's ailing health that had been affecting him throughout pretty much the whole season. Although they have done a surprisingly decent job at including him as much as possible in prior episodes. This is probably the only time where it's most obvious that Hartnell needed to step down for a bit, and I certainly can't blame him. Some folks also don't like the serial that much because of the sets and characters feeling a bit juvenile, and yeah, sometimes they can be, but I also find it kinda charming in a way. It's like Doctor Who meeting with a stage production of Alice in Wonderland, such a weird and bizarre world that these characters are going through. Well, Steven and Dodo anyway, and I think the creative imagery more than makes up for it, except for that one part that uses the N-word. Why did we even need that? I haven't yet watched the animated version of the Celestial Toymaker, but from the looks of it, they lean even further into the drug-inducing visuals thanks to it being in 3D as opposed to 2D. I can't say I'm overly fond of the character designs in this rendition, but I'm more than willing to give it a go someday. Now, some of you might be asking, well, if I thought the Daleks' master plan could have been better by having restored episodes, why is this any different? I think it all just comes down to the scale of both serials. The Celestial Toymaker's not trying to tell a story on nearly the same level as the Daleks' master plan. It's all one big acid trip, and we don't have to take it that seriously. I don't fully need to see what's going on to enjoy the serial, but I definitely feel like I have to with the Daleks' master plan, especially with the large amount of episodes it has. Again, I can see some disagreements with me on this, but that's fine with me. The Celestial Toymaker is also the storyline where I see a lot of dislike towards Dodo, and I don't understand it. I really like Dodo. I think she's fun. Y'all are just hating. Okay, yes, she can be rather naive and treat some of these side characters too much like real people, and Steven has to keep snapping her out of it. Not to mention that she falls for the schoolboy's fake injury and extends her time in the game, but I would say that just further shows how good of a person Dodo is. That even these things which aren't supposed to be real feel real to her. It's almost a childlike curiosity she has and wants to help him as if they're friends too. I don't think that's bad at all. I'm a Dodo defender through and through, and none of you are gonna change my mind. R.I.P. Jackie Lane. The climax is a lot of fun too. Again, it's not often that we have a singular enemy in this era of Doctor Who, but I really enjoy the back and forth between Hartnell and Gough here. And of course we have that "make your last move, Doctor" from the Toymaker, which is a line that I see get used a lot, but it is really cool, and the Toymaker's evil laugh is the icing on the cake. So yeah, I do understand why a portion of the audience may not think the Celestial Toymaker is particularly good, and you might find the animated version more interesting, but if it does get recovered in its original black and white self sometime soon, that would be wonderful. Following that, we have the Gunfighters, and I'm putting this in C tier. I know it's a historical episode, but I actually don't mind Doctor Who going back to the Wild West. It's a very different sort of environment for the characters in that universe to be in, even if I personally need to be in the right kind of mood for westerns. Dodo being able to play the piano and Steven singing about the bar comes right out of nowhere, and it's so stupid, but charmingly stupid. I kinda dig this little number they do together. Although the biggest criticism I do have with the Gunfighters is that same song being sung over and over and over throughout all of the episodes with a new verse each time by this female singer. And for me, it gets so annoying so fast.
It's your last chance to hide, and your last chance of singing.
It's like every 2 minutes whenever a scene's done, this friggin' song has to turn up again, and after the first couple of episodes, I needed that yak from Ren and Stimpy to come in and shut that lady up because it's incredibly distracting.
It's the OK Corral Boys of gunfighting.
Shut up! I can't stand it anymore! All the time, singing! Why won't he stop?
I think the story's fine otherwise. It's a fairly average one with the sort of shenanigans you'd expect from cowboys, like bar fights, murders, massive gun duels that probably wouldn't be done in Doctor Who today with the body count this has, and some badass wanted criminal to cause trouble around these parts. If you like westerns, then you may enjoy this enough. If you don't, then this might be a skip for you. Either way, you gotta put up with that dumbass song, so proceed with caution. We're nearing the end at long last, but next up is the Savages, which I'm putting in D tier, and, hang on a sec, let me just check my notes. Huh. Hey, does anybody remember what happened in the Savages? Yeah, this one was really forgettable for me. Bet you won't believe this. It's another Rebels vs. Dictators storyline with barely anything changing. You know, even the Ark at least mixed it up a little by having germs be the most dangerous existence around that area. But this really is just the oppressed going against the oppressors yet again. And I'm tired of it now, especially with this one being missing too. The idea of draining the intellect of the lower class savages to benefit the higher class people of the city is interesting, and Frederick Yeager does a very good impression of William Hartnell after Jano, the head of the Elders, absorbs the Doctor's mind, but they don't really go much further with those initial concepts. The main thing worth taking away from this is that this is where Stephen leaves for good this time and under much better circumstances compared to the Massacre. It's a nicer departure than Vicky's by a long shot. It gets points by actually having both him and the Doctor on screen unlike before, with Dodo as a bonus, so there's that I suppose. But otherwise, much like bran flakes, very bland cereal, and I'm not going to remember the Savages once this video's over. It did recently get animated though, so maybe it'll be better once it comes to iPlayer. I doubt it. Hey, future Josh Smith here. So I just discovered that the animated version of The Savages has been put on YouTube, which I've taken the time to check out. And I won't name the channel in case anything gets taken down, but I can confirm that this was a slightly better experience compared to watching the Telesnap version for me. The animation itself is definitely better than Galaxy 4's, with characters having more expressions and body language to them, as well as a bigger variety of angles to give a more three-dimensional feel. The only critiques I do have with the animation is that there are a few occasions where the dialogue doesn't quite match the visuals. For example, Stephen shouts to Dodo that he's going to look for the Doctor after he first gets taken to the city, but they're only a small distance from each other, so it's like, dude, I'm right here, no need to rupture my ears. The other example is when the trio get cornered and the place fills with smoke, with Dodo saying she can't see who's coming after them, but in the animation you can make out the pursuers clear as day, so what she's on about there beats me. Ultimately though, despite the animation making things better for me personally, it's still a story that could have had more potential. I know it has its fans, but I'm not one of them sadly. Anyway, on to the next serial. As the last episode of Season 3, we have the War Machines, which I'm putting in A tier. It's really scary with how accurate this serial is to today's world, where AI and technology is slowly replacing humans and taking over Earth. In this case, we have the War Machine, which to be honest doesn't have a very special design. It's just a big tank, and when it's roaming around London for a bit in later episodes, it's essentially a Dalek that doesn't talk. And now the army is involved as well in stopping the machine. We get introduced to two new companions this time, Ben and Polly, who don't get to spend a whole lot of episodes with the First Doctor, as we only have 2 serials left before he changes, but I will say that the pair of them aren't my favorite companions out there. Polly's fine, but doesn't stand out too much for me personally, and Ben just gets too obsessed with Polly sometimes while not sharing a great deal about himself. Get used to hearing Ben say, "What about Polly?" He does that a lot, especially during the Troughton era. Dodo also has possibly the worst companion exit of Classic Who so far. She gets possessed by the company who make the War Machines, which the Doctor snaps her out of, and sends her to stay in the countryside for a bit while she recovers. Fair enough, but that is the last we ever see of her. Only getting a brief message once everything's resolved that's passed through Polly, so she's not even here in person. Fucking weak. Aside from a few issues, it's nice to have a story that's, part of the pun, more down to earth compared to what we've had thus far. The action scenes with the army's quite cool, and the themes are more relevant now than they ever were in 1966. 2 thumbs up from me. And that wraps up Season 3. I've gotta say this was a bit of a mixed bag overall. I wouldn't say any of them were awful this time, there's no way it can get worse than the Web Planet from here, but some of the serials were either just okay or run-of-the-mill. There are a few pretty good ones for sure, but the quality doesn't feel as consistent this season when looking back at the previous ones. A huge part of that is likely down to just how many missing episodes there are in Season 3. There's so much that's gone now, and most of them still haven't been resurrected as of yet. Would it make the serials better if they were? Possibly, but I guess we'll never know. Or at least not for a very, very long time. So Hartnell is technically in Season 4 as well, but only in the first couple of serials before we finally move on to the second Doctor. You won't need to worry about me talking about another season's worth of episodes. We're almost at the end here, so without further ado, let's finish things off. First up for Season 4, we have the Smugglers, which I'm putting in D tier. It's another historical plot. There's pirates in it. They search for Henry Avery's treasure. And finally, we come to the last serial of the Hartnell era with the 10th Planet, which I'm putting in B tier. There's a couple of big firsts in the show's history. Number 1, the debut of the Cybermen, and number 2, the Doctor's first regeneration. To start with the Cybermen, they very quickly became almost as popular as the Daleks, marking them as another race of villains to face the Doctor if the show ever needed more views. To me, the Mondasian Cybermen have probably the creepiest design out of any Cybermen in Doctor Who's history. The idea for them is that they've been quote-unquote upgraded from being normal humans to these lifeless machines whose sole purpose is to make the entire human race like them, free of emotions, pain, or disease. It's scary body horror that you never see the full process of, but just imagining it is terrifying enough. We've all been to a hospital or the doctor's office or the dentist, which can be uncomfortable on their own, but this is on a whole other level. Perhaps the reason as to why the Mondasian Cybermen look so frightening is because this is the most human they've ever appeared, and they have this disturbing voice with these very strange speech patterns as they move their mouths slightly while they're talking. The design is a lot more simple compared to the Cybermen we have now, but it's definitely the most effective for me. I can't stand looking at these things, and that's entirely the point. Then by the end of the serial, we also get introduced to the concept of regeneration, which for the first Doctor is due to his body wearing out, likely from old age. Whenever the Doctor's on the brink of death, he changes into a whole other person, face, personality, everything, but is still the Doctor at heart. Hartnell's health was gradually getting worse to the point that he couldn't really do the role anymore. In fact, throughout episode 3 of the 10th Planet, he's almost completely out of the picture and taking a good old nap. So in order to keep the show running, the production staff had to have the Doctor go through a regeneration cycle and be replaced with a new actor, in this case Patrick Troughton as Doctor Number 2. What may seem like a sort of cheap gimmick just so that Doctor Who can continue actually ends up being one of the show's most defining features, allowing for fresher ideas with a brand new Doctor. Even today, every time a new actor playing the Doctor gets announced, people still talk about it and love to speculate. How is this Doctor going to be different to the others? What are they bringing to the table? And how do the stories change around them? It's an extremely clever idea that's not only kept Doctor Who on the air for as long as it has done, but it also fits perfectly into the show's world, with everybody having their own favorite eras and Doctors because of it. So why am I only putting the 10th Planet in B tier then? Well, truthfully, the Cybermen don't really appear a whole lot, which caught me way off guard. They're of course at the end of the first episode with that famous cliffhanger, then they have more screen time in the second episode to show you what they're all about, but after that they disappear altogether in the third episode aside from one very brief scene, and only come back in the last episode, which by the way is also missing. Thankfully that has been animated for a long time now though, and the original regeneration sequence is still intact for anyone to see. This is an iconic serial for Doctor Who, arguably nearly as much as the Daleks was back in season 1, but when your star villains aren't present in a good chunk of it, that's a little bit of a problem for me. Some things about the 10th Planet are really good, like that famous shot of the Doctor talking to the Cybermen about emotions and their lack of them. When the Cybermen do turn up, they will be sure to leave a lasting impression on you, and the outside shots in the snow are absolutely beautiful. I have no complaints whatsoever about all that. It's just that when the Cybermen aren't there for so long, it does hurt the serial somewhat. But should you still watch it? Absolutely. It's a very important piece of history for Doctor Who, and an entertaining watch nevertheless. And there we have it, we've done it! That's all of the William Hartnell era, and I thank everyone who's managed to get to the end of this and hear my thoughts about an old sci-fi show from the 60s. Hopefully my ranking list doesn't seem too controversial, but if you do have a different ranking list to me, put it down in the comments below. Let me know if you also want me to do the other Doctors, and I'll be more than happy to oblige. I love talking about Doctor Who, and I really enjoy making this video. It's nice to do something different for once. Take care everybody, and I'll see you later.
Thank you for watching this video. Subscribe to Trash or Treasure for more reviews, or you will become like us.